years now.
That's right.
Almost every starter back on both sides. The most returning production of any team in the country. So I feel like that we mentioned feeling out. We mentioned being maybe a little conservative. He may still be a little vanilla, like you mentioned with the play calling, but there's not going to be this, all right, let's see what we got out of this guy. Let's see what this group looks like. We already know what most of these guys look like on the field together. So I think that's a big bonus too. But again, the biggest thing for me is that losing to South Alabama last year told this team you can't overlook anybody. And then the fact that you're playing a team that won the national championship last year and the year before, there shouldn't be any overlooking from this team.
Yeah, and look, the start of this game will certainly dictate, I think, how vanilla this game ultimately becomes, right? You're able to punch a couple in early, get a lead. You're probably able to maybe run things a little bit more vanilla. If this is a really competitive game for a while, then you might be forced to dig a little deeper into the playbook than you would like.
Yeah.
All that said, I mean, you know what the quarterback situation is this year as opposed to last year where you're rotating guys and there was really no ownership over the offense by the leader of the offense being the quarterback.
Right.
Alan Bowman going into his 7th year, the doctor, as I like to call him, Dr. Bowman at the helm. You know, he has complete leadership of this group at this point. Ollie Gordon, you know, to a degree, he was invisible going into conference play and caught many people by surprise. All that said, he's not going to catch anyone by surprise coming into this season, and I would imagine most defenses are going to focus on stopping Ollie Gordon, the Doak Walker Award winner, first and foremost. So I think that opens a giant opportunity for Alan Bowman and the talented pass catchers for the Cowboys to have some big moments early in this season, including today.
Yeah, I think as you grab our credentials, make sure they don't fly off up here on the roof. That would be bad. 20 carries, I think, is what Mike Gundy said is the target for each game for Ollie Gordon. And I think there were 8-0 in the games that Ollie Gordon got 20 or more carries. So I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Why not feed that guy the ball? I'd be curious to see how much they feed him today. Again, to your point, if it's something that this game's close throughout, he's probably going to get to that mark. If it's something that they get on him early and South Dakota State's playing from behind, maybe you're able to get some more run from different guys and rest all these legs because you're going to need to run them all season long. So that'll be interesting to see. The receiving core's going to be good, and the nice thing to talk about, you got Brendan Presley coming back. Rashad Owens really stepped up and had a nice campaign last year. You bring back Dazon Stribling, who I think people are excited to see because he looked great early in the season last year before going down with injury. Talon Shetron from the Edmond area. Glad to see he's back, healthy, see what he looks like too. So there's a bunch of guys there that I think we mentioned it with OU, the depth of receiver. I think the Cowboys kind of have that as well.
There is a very unique balance, I think, happening with Ollie Gordon and the way that you have to approach this season because you have to manage his workload, number one, right? You don't want to overdo it too early and you don't want him to wear down. I think you have to develop some players behind him because right now the running backs behind Ollie Gordon are somewhat of an unknown, but you also have a guy that's a Heisman Trophy candidate, right? And it is, I'm not saying that you run him into the ground in order to win him a Heisman, but being in the Heisman race is good publicity for a university. So you have to do your part to get him the opportunities to stay in that race on a week-to-week basis. So there's several things at play, I think, in terms of the usage of Ollie Gordon in a game like this and when you pull the reins back and when you let others have the opportunity. But you definitely want him to have his highlight moments in a game like this. You know, as far as the receivers go, Rashad Owens was incredible last season. We knew going into the year that Brendan Presley was going to be one of the best receivers in the conference. He was. He's going to end up, toward the top of all the receiving records by the time he's done.
Yeah.
But when Dazon Stribling went down, we didn't really know who was going to step into that role. I thought Rashad Owens was as important to their success last season as maybe anybody on the offense.
Yeah, no doubt. Leon Johnson played a big part in that as well, the transfer, and he's obviously not here anymore. So, but Rashad Owens, I think the only person that probably expected him to have any success was Rashad Owens, right? Like, the guy's just got a ton of self-confidence and very humble, obviously, but when we've talked to him in the past, he said, like, man, I was just kind of waiting for that opportunity, and when I got it, I ran with it. And so that's the kind of guy he is, and now you bring him back as not a focal point, but a guy that you can lean on and trust, as you mentioned, and that's going to be great for that offense. And having Alan Bowman, back to the quarterback really quick before we talk defense, having a quarterback set in stone does so much for your offense.
100%.
Playing multiple quarterbacks is almost never works unless you have a guy like a goal line package and that's it. Trying to rotate 3 guys in and play them in the offense is so hard to do.
That's right.
And so having Alan Bowman be the guy and, as you said, be a leader of that offense, regardless of how talented he is. We're not saying he's a world beater, but he's your guy. He's the guy. and he knows he's the guy. Your offense knows he's the guy, and I think that does a lot of stuff for your offense.
When you're splitting quarterback snaps the way they did a year ago, it's hard for one of those guys to emerge as a leader simply because you're not out there all the time.
Right.
I think it's hard for the guys on offense to look at one guy and try to follow. When you're rotating quarterbacks that way. And look, Alan Bowman has his deficiencies without a doubt. I would just say that if he is no better than he was last year, they made the Big 12 championship game, right? He's going to have an entire offseason now where he is the guy. It's not a quarterback competition, and they can literally all work together as him being QB1. So if he is improved in any way, that's got to be gigantic pluses for this OSU offense. And look, I don't even think he has to be like all Big 12 type quarterback. He's just got to limit the mistakes that we saw him make a year ago and not put this Oklahoma State team in positions, especially in close games, where they're giving the ball away and allowing teams to have an advantage on them in the turnover department.
Yeah, it's exactly similar conversation we've had about Jackson Arnold. Like, you don't have to win every game for your team, right? You got plenty of talent around you. For OU, it's the defense, right? Like, just don't put your defense in bad situations. Those guys are going to win you some ball games. For Alan Bowman, it's just give the ball to Ollie Gordon and get out of the way. And then if you have opportunities on third downs or if you need to take shots, connect on those. If it's not open, throw it away, right? So, yes, you don't have to be the guy that wins these games for your team. Now, there's going to be moments where you're going to be called on and say, hey, we need you to make this throw. We need you to make this drive, 2-minute drill. Maybe you're down late in the fourth. Like, you need to execute those. But for the most part, it's simply just be a game manager, and that is not a slight on him at all.
Not a bad thing. Despite what everyone says, he's just a game manager. That is a giant compliment in my book. So if he's a game manager, that is what Mike Gundy wants out of that position. I do want to just throw something at the offensive line real quick, because we're in this bizarro world where for nearly a decade, Oklahoma has had among the best offensive lines in all of college football, right? And during that same time period, the offensive line has been the biggest question mark at Oklahoma State. Right? Every year I get told from people I know within the program, offensive line's going to be better this year. And there were a couple years where I started to buy it, and then it wasn't true. And I got to the point where it's like, I will not believe that until I actually see it. And the same thing happened last year. I was told this group is going to turn the offensive line around for the first time in a decade. I'll believe it when I see it. Well, we finally saw it last year. Now, it didn't start out of the gate. But they came into their own as the season went on. All 5 starters return. And that is supposed to be one of the strengths of this football team, is the 5 guys up front and some of the depth that they have on the offensive line.
Yeah, and you're blocking, again, for one of the best tailbacks in the country, too. So that helps. And when your run game struggles, generally the first thought is, well, the O-line must not be very good. And that's been the case for the most part. But you really haven't had like a guy like an Ollie Gordon that is just a complete workhorse that's going to get yards after contact, that can get through a hole and explode through that hole and get those explosive plays. So having him and the combination of a veteran offensive line makes the run game look terrific. And so, yeah, I think that's been a big strength. It's been so good, or it's expected to be so good, that we have hardly talked about it, right? Normally, like you said, it's a storyline going into the season. The storyline right now is that we're expecting them to be so good we don't have to worry about them. And so, yeah, I think keep an eye on the offensive line today, especially against South Dakota State, because they would consider that a strength, as them being physical up front, the Jackrabbits. And so pay attention to that. This would be a good test for them early.
All right, let's talk about the defense. It was a group a year ago that definitely had some standout players. In terms of how the group as a whole performed, it was inconsistent, right? There were good moments, there were bad moments. They certainly gave up their share of big plays. It's an area where I think you have a lot of experience coming back. You have a lot of players a year ago that were really young, especially on the back end of that defense, that you expect to maybe not have as many breakdowns coming into this year. So I'm curious, we haven't even talked about this off the air, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on, I guess, just the expectation of this Oklahoma State defense.
Just be better than last year is probably that. There's not like I don't think you look at this unit and say this is going to be a top 10 defense in the country.
Right.
And I also don't think you don't need that, right? You have the pieces, right? We mentioned Colin Oliver, Nick Martin. Those are the guys that everybody wants to talk about, right? Kendall Daniels is interesting to me, and I know we'll talk about that more, I'm sure. But moving back from safety down to linebacker, he's a little bit bigger body. I'd be curious what that role looks like for him in Brian Nardo's scheme. He was more of a defensive back in high school, so moving him down I say late in his college career is interesting. He's got the frame for it. I think he has the physicality for it, but that'll be something to keep an eye on, because if that doesn't work, then you have to shuffle some guys around. And so I think that'll be something to keep an eye on, especially today.
I think he does have the physicality for it. My biggest question is, where is the mental side of it?
Sure.
I thought early in the season last year, there was a bit of a learning curve for Colin Oliver, right? Playing off the line of scrimmage at times,
sure.
and what that looked like. And he came into his own, right? By midseason, it felt like he was terrific. But early in the season, it kind of felt like he was playing a little slower because he was not playing something that he had done before. I wonder if Kendall Daniels has a similar experience. But look, both of those guys are tremendous playmakers. We're going to see them make plays.
Yeah.
But back to my original point about the defense, the amount of, I think, just giant plays given up and big breakdowns, that's what you want to avoid. The mental mistakes from this defense are what you want to avoid.
Yeah, and I think that's something that hopefully in year 2 under Brian Nardo, some of those communication issues maybe in the back end get solved. They didn't really get a ton of pressure up front, which can also put some strain on your secondary. If it's a young and experienced secondary, that can be a problem. So maybe getting a little more pressure up front with the defensive line, not bringing 5 or 6 to do that, by getting home with 3 or 4. Talked about it last time with the OU live stream, getting pressure in the interior. Like all those things can help a young, inexperienced secondary. They are more mature now, obviously.
That's right.
But that's all big. So I'd be curious, too, how Brian Nardo's defense looks different maybe in year 2, right? We talk about maybe the expectations being elevated and wanting to be better, but how much has this scheme been tweaked? They mentioned, Mike Gundy mentioned all through the offseason going both odd and even front, so 3 down and 4 down. I think that'll be good, as opposed to just being strictly odd or a 3-man front.
They mixed it up a lot last year, and a lot of that was because you're implementing this new defense, but you have players that are comfortable with the even man front.
Yeah.
So I think they were kind of forced into that.
Yeah.
You would imagine in year 2 of Brian Nardo that you can maybe pick your spots a little bit better in terms of when you want to utilize even and odd fronts.
One guy too I'm interested to see, just from a local perspective, but also because he was really talented, Justin Wright. Old man, he's been around in college football for a long time. Got hurt early last season, transferred from Tulsa. I don't know if he's going to be a guy that plays 70, 80 snaps, but he's an old veteran dude that can give you a lot of production, and he's a spark plug, tons of energy. Curious to see what he looks like coming back from injury.
Yeah, and that's a linebacking core a year ago that Nick Martin and Xavier Benson were terrific. Nick Martin was a tackling machine, and Justin Wright's just experience in general, I think, is going to get him on the football field and give him opportunities. And you love to see him coming back. And I know when he got here, he kind of jumped into a leadership role out of the gate, and he hadn't even played a snap for them. So I think from that standpoint, he's going to get his opportunities. I do want to hit the corners for a moment, because I think Corey Black and Cam Smith might be among the best corner tandems in the Big 12 this year. I think they're severely underrated. And, I think the safeties at times were where Oklahoma State really got beat in the passing game last year, but the corners on the outside, for the most part, not that they didn't get beat, but for the most part, I thought those guys were really good, and those guys come back this year. So that, to me, would be another strength for the defense.
Well, and if you have the ability to have 2, we'll call them traditionally lockdown corners on the outside, it does so much more for your defense. Frees you up to blitz more, play more man if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And so if you don't feel confident about getting home with 3 or 4, you feel confident with the outside guys containing or guarding their man, and now you can blitz more and feel more comfortable doing that. So I agree. Corners are often, for us, not talked about because, in our perspective, we're not shooting them, right? We're not filming them because they're not getting the ball thrown in their direction. That's the biggest compliment we can give to a secondary is, well, I didn't see much of Corey Black today. Probably means he was guarding this guy pretty well. So I think having some experience and some confidence in those guys on the outside can do a lot for a defense.
All right, let's talk about the game and maybe give score predictions. I don't even know if you've thought about a score. I do think it's interesting where the line has been leading up to this game. I mean, depending where you look, 9, 9.5, 10. South Dakota State, again, 2-time defending FCS champions, 29-game win streak. Mike Gundy mentioned it in the press conference on the line of scrimmage. He feels like they have the type of players that can compete in the Power 4. They have a terrific quarterback. I don't know if this line is giving South Dakota State a lot of credit for what they've done. I don't know if this line is maybe looking at Oklahoma State traditionally being slow starters and how they somewhat limped to the finish line down the stretch of last season. They had really close games down the stretch, and obviously the Big 12 championship against Texas was somewhat one-sided. So, I don't know, I guess, from what perspective the odds makers are looking at that line from. But I feel like, to me, this is an Oklahoma State cover, but I don't think it's something that they dominate and just run away from South Dakota State out of the gate.
I think, given the history of Mike Gundy's team starting slow, given the history of them performing poorly against FCS teams last year, we saw it. The first quarter, maybe first quarter and a half, will determine how this game goes. If it's something where Oklahoma State comes out firing and is dominating up front, and Ollie Gordon gets loose and they get up, 2-3 scores, then obviously you're looking at potentially a blowout. If it's something where the game's close as you're kind of heading towards halftime, I think it's going to be close in the second half too. So I think the line is placed for both factors. You mentioned, is it because of OSU or is it because of respect to South Dakota State?
Bit of both.
I think it's both. And I also think we've mentioned this before. Vegas has historically not liked Oklahoma State.
That's right.
I mean, the win total is only 8.5, which seems low for a team that brings back as much as they do, and a Big 12 favorite, one of the Big 12 favorites. So anyway, I think it all depends on the start, and history tells us Oklahoma State has not been a fast starter, but today I think they do. I think they do. I think it's been talked about all offseason. This game has been talked about. They mentioned it at spring ball. They mentioned it at Big 12 Media Days. They mentioned it during fall camp, and they mentioned it in the preseason press conference. I think they start fast, and so I think they cover. Did you want to throw scores out there yet?
Yeah, we can. I did want to just make a point because in terms of the slow starts, the best, obviously 2011 is the best team in Oklahoma State history. They won the Big 12. They beat Stanford in the Fiesta Bowl. Brandon Whedon, Justin Blackman, that group, they were fantastic. The last two times they've been in the Big 12 championship, last year against Texas, and then was it 21? The Spencer Sanders team that lost by inches to Baylor. Both of those teams were, I don't want to call them terrible, but they're close to terrible in the non-conference portion of the season, right? Last year's team lost to South Alabama. That team with Spencer Sanders in 2021, I believe it was. I remember after the Boise game, I think they were 3-0 at that point, if I remember correctly, but after the Boise game, I think fans were ready to fire everyone, right? It did not look pretty. They were struggling.
Is that the year they almost lost to Missouri State?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it was.
Yeah, it was. It was not pretty on the football field in those first three games, and then they turned a corner midway through the season and won big down the stretch and nearly beat Baylor for a Big 12 championship. So the two best seasons they've had in the last 10 years, playing for conference championships, most fans would have told you after the non-conference portion of those seasons, this team has no chance, they're cooked, and they're terrible.
Right, I would agree with that. And so I think this is a game you can't afford, and honestly, a non-conference slate in general, you can't afford to start slow. South Dakota State's good, Arkansas is not going to be easy, and then Tulsa is probably your easiest non-conference game, and they appear to be capable. So
it's on the road,
Right. So you can't start. What we're saying is you can't start slow, especially not today.
That's right.
All right, what do you got?
All right, give me Oklahoma State 45, and I will take South Dakota State 24.
Okay, so that's a cover. I think let's roll with 9.5 being the line. I think it's the last one. I think ESPN maybe had one at 13.
Okay.
But I'll go with the 9.5 line. I think it's going to be closer than that. I think I like the 24 number, 34-24. I think Oklahoma State wins. Because I think they start slow is what's going to happen. If they have enough talent to push it over the edge at the end, I do think South Dakota State has enough firepower to score some points.
And I will say, I don't think that they just control the game entirely from start to finish. I think it's a close game, and I think down the stretch, Oklahoma State really separates, and that's where you get the point differential. I think it is competitive, though, and I think third and fourth quarters, the physicality and Ollie Gordon's ability to wear you down over 4 quarters, I think they pull away in the second half. But I do expect a very competitive first half, and I expect South Dakota State to give them everything they want early.
Looking forward to it, man. I've watched South Dakota State on TV, like in the national championship. I love the brand of football they play. Same with North Dakota State. Those guys they're tough, physical. They're going to run it regardless who you're playing. They're going to run down your throat. They're going to try to establish dominance up front. So it's up to Oklahoma State to kind of match that today.
That's right. All right, that's it for us. We're going to wrap up. We're going to go find our pregame meal and get ready for kickoff. At 1 p.m. here in Stillwater, we will have postgame coverage. We will go live, I'm guessing, around 5:30. So if you want to tune back in, 5:30-ish, if you want to tune back in, we're going to try to do one of these after the game and break down everything that we witness here in the next few hours. For TJ Eckert, I'm Colby Daniels. Happy college football game day, everyone, and we'll talk to you later.